Welcome back. We're continuing our discussion about Syria's future, and joining us now from Denver is the co-editor of a book entitled The Syria Dilemma and the director of the Center for Middle East Studies at the University of Denver, Nada Hashemi. And joining us from Damascus is Bassam Abu Abdullah. He's the head of the Damascus Center for Strategic Studies and a frequent spokesman for the Syrian Ministry of Information. Gentlemen, thanks to both of you for joining us. President Assad has announced elections for June 3rd. That announcement has been met with a great deal of condemnation by the European Union, by the United States, as well as the United Nations. In fact, the United Nations representative said that elections in Syria will jeopardize peace efforts in that country. But I want you to listen to what Jay Carney, the White House spokesman, had to say about that announcement. Let's listen.
No, he's making a mockery of his own pretensions to being a democratically elected leader. A presidential referendum, which is what this would be, is a parody of democracy and would have no credibility or legitimacy within Syria or outside of Syria.
Bassam, I want to get your response to what Jay Carney said.
This is his opinion, because I think that Syria is an independent state. Secondly, I think this is obligation in our constitution, and we should not ask anyone or any state. Otherwise, we will wait the acceptance of US and European Union and other states to make these elections. So because of that, this is expected things, because these states merely is not objective. They have not objective position towards what's going on inside Syria, and they are what I can say enemy front against Syrian people and against President Assad, and because of that we are expecting some kind of these declaration or these statements.
Nada Hashemi in Denver, what do you think President Assad is trying to achieve with these elections?
Well, I think he's trying to send a message to the world that he has legitimacy within his own country. But I think most reasonable people will laugh at his attempts to stage another election. I mean, first of all, I think we need to be honest here. There never was a free and fair election under the Assad family, whether the father or the son. So to talk about a re-election sort of presupposes that there was a free election, before this one that is being proposed in early June. And so I think the game really here is to try and send a message to his own supporters and to his allies in Tehran, Moscow, and Beirut that, look, he does have democratic legitimacy, but with 150,000 people killed, approximately half of the Syrian population either internally displaced or turned into refugees, the idea of an election in that context is really a joke.
Well, let me ask Bassam Abu Abdullah about that. How can an election take place in Syria when you have those conditions? You are in the midst of a civil war, and as Nada just pointed out, there are millions of people who are displaced, who are refugees, and 150,000 people have so far been killed in this violence.
I am not ignoring that, but if we will wait until the foreign powers, they will stop supporting terrorism, we will have no constitutional parliament or no president and no government. Because of that, either in the content of the Geneva Declaration June 2012, I think one of the targets of the Geneva Declaration was that we should keep the governmental organization establishment. So if we will wait Turkey until they will stop financing and supporting terrorism, this is not civil war. We should differ between civil war and what's going on inside Syria. We are combating international terrorism, which now is recognized around the world. Either European countries, they are recognizing what kind they have their citizens inside Syria. They are jihadists, French or American or European, from Chechen, from 82 nationalities around the world. So because of that, I think the real challenge now that the Syrian people, they will go to vote, and the opportunity for opposition is opening up for participating. Otherwise, And this is one of the exits for the Syrian people through constitution and through political process. Otherwise, the foreign power, they don't want anything. They want to make the puppet regime inside Syria, or the puppet state, which is refusing the Syrian people.
Nada, is it likely that President Assad will entrench his position after these elections? Because he's already saying that the military situation has reached a turning point in Syria and that he now has the upper hand. In fact, he's talking about ending military operations by the end of the year.
Yeah, I mean, and that's what he'd like to believe. I mean, I think he does have the upper hand, not because he's internally strong or he has internal legitimacy in the eyes of his own people, but because he is getting relatively stronger backing from Russia and from Iran, which is why he is, I think, making these statements and why he's, expressing some confidence. But I think if there was a balanced playing field, and if there was a free and fair internal debate in Syria and a free and fair election, Assad's claim to legitimacy will be, I think, exposed as a fraud. And I think most people realize that, which is precisely why there's never been a free and fair election in Syria, and there never will be under the Assad regime.
Bassam, do you hold out any hope that there will be talks between the Assad government and the rebels who are fighting in Syria to reach some kind of solution off the battlefield to the violence that's taking place there?
Solution is political solution. The problem that either in Geneva first conference and second, we were negotiating United States and its allies in the West. The second, the question that we are ready to negotiate Syrian people, we are not ready to negotiate rebels or terrorists. Because if you could see the photos from Ma'loula or other cities in Syria, you can discover what kind of people we are facing here in Syria. We are facing real barbarous people, and I think this is the duty of President Assad and the Syrian army and the Syrian people to fight this terrorism. Now we are in front of open cards, and to talk about free elections, I think the United States accepted free election in Afghanistan under occupation in Afghanistan, and the West recognized the government in Ukraine, which is not through constitution and against Ukrainian people. So we should recognize that we are in front of two axes and in front of a new world order, and because of that we should consider that it's not very important for the United States the free election or not free election, because one of the main allies of the United States and the West is states like in the Gulf states which they have no constitution, no human rights, nothing absolutely, and they consider them as a ally of the United States. So I think the war against Syria, it's including that we will listen to this terminology, and after 1, 2, 3 months, I think the West, they will recognize the reality. In politics, there is reality. The reality that President Assad is strong enough, he has his popularity, and US and the West, they know that. Because they know that, because they are afraid from the election.
Okay, Nada, given that there are these tensions between the United States and Russia at the moment over Ukraine, is it likely to embolden President Assad because he believes that he will now get more support from Russia?
Well, it's an open question how the events in Ukraine are going to affect the crisis in Syria. I mean, in the immediate term, I think it will highlight the fact that the idea of the United States and Russia working together, as we sort of saw in the lead up to the Geneva conference, to work on a common agenda, that opportunity is, I think, passed us by. There's no goodwill between the United States and Russia in terms of their bilateral relations, in terms of the crisis in Ukraine, and I think that's going to have, effects on the crisis in Syria. So it really depends on what the United States decides to do. What does Obama decide to do with respect to Syria? Does he continue to put his head in the ground and turn away, hoping that the Syrian conflict will resolve itself, or will he then take this opportunity to sort of clearly state that given Russia's obstructionist policies in Ukraine, given its obstructionist policies in the context of Syria, the United States and the West can no longer work with Russia to try and solve the Syrian crisis. And thus then it has to go alone. The United States has to sort of invoke and work with a coalition of willing nations who are seriously interested in resolving the crisis in Syria. So that's an open question. We don't know how this is going to play out, but everyone is watching to wait to see what the answer to that question will be.
Nada Hashemi, Bassam Abdullah, we will have a lot more to talk about. Stay with us, but we are going to take a break right now. More on the conflict in Syria when the heat continues. We'll be back in a moment.